In 2007, the Annie E. Casey Foundation wrote a report about a middle school in a poor area of Atlanta, Georgia, Parks Middle School. It was called Beating the Odds. That was the title of the report, Beating the Odds. Year after year, student test scores at Parks were rising. In 2008, they were approaching what students were getting in gentrified neighborhoods in Atlanta. It was very, very encouraging news for people who want to believe that schools can overcome the educational problems associated with poverty. How did Parks Middle School do it? Well, according to the report, it was the school's relentless focus on data. That's what the report said, the school's relentless focus on data. Teachers kept, and this was another phrase they used, standard-based mastery folders for their students. The folders were filled with detailed information about what students needed to know to successfully master the curriculum. That was the key, according to the report. In 2009, Parks Middle School won a Dispelling the Myth Award. Obama's Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, gave the keynote speech at the awards ceremony, praising the school for showing how much can be accomplished by students from poor neighborhoods, how much students can achieve if they're given the right kinds of motivation and strong, focused instruction from the staff. No more excuses. If Parks Middle School in Atlanta can do it, other schools should be able to do it as well. That same year, Atlanta School Superintendent Beverly Hall was named Superintendent of the Year by the American Association of School Administrators. Atlanta was so proud, the City Council declared that day would be known as Dr. Beverly L. Hall Day in her honor. There was only one problem. It was all a lie. Parks Middle School and other schools in the district had been cheating on the standardized tests all along. The staff took the fill-in-the-bubble tests after the students finished them, erased the wrong answers, and filled in the right answers. When people became suspicious about the scores, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation sent agents into the schools. After a lengthy investigation, many teachers and principals admitted their guilt, were fired, and faced trial on criminal charges. Teachers are being bashed enough lately, but cheating, it's unconscionable. It's a scandal. It sounds like we have yet another reason to talk about what's wrong with our schools. And unfortunately, there are very strong indications that this kind of thing has been happening all over the country, including here in Arizona, ever since high-stakes testing became the norm with No Child Left Behind, though most of the cheating hasn't been proven. It took a massive investigation to uncover the problem in Atlanta, and other communities they haven't made a similar effort. This July, New Yorker magazine published a very, very good article called Wrong Answer about the Atlanta cheating scandal. It put a human face on what happened there. Instead of the teachers and administrators coming off as lazy, conniving people who didn't care about their students, only about the test scores, the article shows hard-working principals who were making slow but significant progress with their students, but were expected to do much more. In other words, to do the impossible. I'll get back to Atlanta in a minute, but first, let me tell you a personal story. I retired from teaching in 2003 after over 30 years in the classroom, mostly as a high school English teacher. In all those years, I can't remember hearing the words teachers and cheating used together. Teachers aren't perfect people, of course. We're prone to the same weaknesses as people in other professions, but cheating, and especially cheating on an organized level, it just didn't happen. Well, a few years before I retired, Oregon, where I taught, began giving high-stakes tests to sophomores in the spring. The students had to pass the test to graduate. I remember distinctly the first time I picked up the shrink-wrap packet of tests from the counseling office. It was on a Friday afternoon before I left for the weekend, and the test wasn't going to be given until Wednesday. Nobody worried much about security at the time because obviously teachers could be trusted with the tests. Teachers don't cheat. Well, like most teachers, I had done some teaching to the test that year. I mean, look, if I can help students get some of those borderline students to earn a few extra points so they pass that test, that means they wouldn't have to worry about taking it again next year. They'd have that graduation requirement out of the way. And to be perfectly honest, I wanted my students to score well for my own personal ego gratification as well. I mean, their high scores told me and whoever else was watching that I was a good teacher. Well, that Friday, as I opened my file cabinet to put away the test packets, it occurred to me for the first time how easy it would be to just break open the seal and look over the test questions. And I could kind of gear my lessons over the next few days to give my students, a little extra help with a few of the questions. Nothing obvious, mind you, just a little help. I didn't open those test packets Friday. They stayed in my file until testing day. Now, I'm not patting myself on the back about what a great moral guy I am here. It's just that the temptation wasn't that great. The high-stake tests were for the students. They weren't for me. I wasn't being evaluated on my students' scores at that time. My job wasn't on the line. Would I have taken a peek or two if the stakes were higher for me? If I was worried about my job, would I have been tempted to change a few of my students' wrong answers? Thankfully, I'll never know because I don't know if I would have passed that test, to be perfectly honest. But for teachers today, especially in schools like Parks in Atlanta, where students from poor neighborhoods traditionally get low scores, the stakes are incredibly high. Teachers can be transferred or fired if their student scores are too low. Principals can be transferred or fired. Schools can be closed down with neighborhood children scattered all over the city. If you work in one of those schools, for your own sake, for your fellow teacher's sake, for the school's sake, you feel intense pressure to produce the highest scores possible by any means necessary. The teacher at the center of the New Yorker article is a guy named Demony Lewis. By all accounts, he was a terrific, caring teacher. He grew up as a kid in a violent neighborhood. He was raised by a single mother. He received a college scholarship. He graduated with degrees in math and philosophy, and he chose to go into teaching as a calling. Along with teaching, he was the football and the soccer and the softball coach, and he founded the school's chess club. He'd take kids' laundry home to wash and let kids sleep at his house if their mothers were gone or if their mothers were high on drugs. But he and others at the school were confronted with the district's demand that students get high marks on the yearly standardized tests. And the school students weren't making adequate yearly progress. Well, Lewis had students whose skill levels were at the first grade level, but somehow or other they had passed their 5th grade competency tests the year before. Clearly, the elementary school teachers had cheated. Lewis and the others decided they had to do the same. And so it continued year after year. The teachers taught hard and apparently taught well during the year, but every spring, test time became erase and replace time. Every year, student scores were supposed to be a little higher, so every year the staff had to cheat a little more. They knew the scores were ridiculously high, and they were sure someone would call them for it, but amazingly for years, no one did. Instead, Parks Middle School and its staff were showered with honors for beating the odds. Now, this story is complicated enough already. It's got all kinds of ramifications, but to make it even more complicated, the amazing thing is that student scores in the district actually increased in those years when the teachers were cheating on the nationally normed NAEP, the NAEP test. And that's the accepted test by most educators as a fairly accurate measure of student achievement. And you can't prepare students for it. The students' achievement went up. Who knows? Maybe the positive reinforcement of students, students got from thinking they were successful on those high stakes tests made them work harder. Maybe the district's emphasis on achievement made the teachers work harder as well. We'll never know. High stakes tests. There's no evidence they've improved the quality of our schools or the achievement of our students. There's far more evidence that they've been a destructive force to our country's education. And yet here's another example. Teachers, good teachers, dedicated teachers feel pressure to raise students' test scores by any means necessary, teaching to the test at the expense of the rest of the curriculum, giving students subtle and not so subtle help while they're taking the test, and in too many cases across the country, changing students' answers to boost their scores.
Well, Dave, this is an incredible article that was written in the New Yorker, and I'm so glad that you've brought it to the attention of people locally, because we deal with these issues in Arizona, not necessarily the cheating scandals that we know of, but the issues of high-stakes testing and what it means for our students, their teachers, and their schools. And you can definitely see that if you are looking at having to basically disband a school, close a school, or have half of its staff or all of its staff turnover. There is an incentive to make sure that that doesn't happen. We've had principals here who have lost their jobs in high poverty schools because those scores are not going up the way that they should. And so what this whole scandal, I was so glad to see it sort of explained the way that the New Yorker journalists did, and at the very human level, because it really brings home the complete failure, I think, of No Child Left Behind, of high stakes testing, and it just shows the underbelly of all of that. And we have the people in the reform movement that would like us to believe that this Atlanta school, that what was achieved there is possible. And we learn now that that was a myth. It was a complete myth and a complete lie. And it's sad that these people have ruined their careers when, from reading this piece, it sounds like they really were not so self-interested as they were interested in the children, and not seeing that community just disband the school.
It's a terrible situation, and you're absolutely right. When one school is held up as a standard by Arnie Duncan, who says that they can do it, everyone can do it, other people say to themselves either, I'm doing something wrong, what am I doing wrong? Their community says, why are these teachers so bad? And the teachers say, somehow I've got to raise the scores too. How can I do that? And all of a sudden, this becomes a syndrome. I mean, if for people who are sports fans, this is like a bicycler racing next to someone who's on steroids or who's been doing drug doping, and they say, if I'm clean, I'm going to lose. If I do what he does, I'm just like him, but I almost have no choice. And teachers are put into that horrible situation of doing it for their own good, for the students' own good, for the school's own good, because we're being given a false standard that simply doesn't work and is being used against the schools and against the students.
Well, and I think the other myth that is out there that is being, perpetuated by holding up these outlying, schools, which now we find out this was just based on a big fat lie, is that poverty doesn't matter. That you can overcome poverty if you just test like crazy. And, children are not machines, they're not robots. There was a mention in the story that, the teachers had 2 weeks to teach percentages. Right. And if your kids didn't learn percentages in 2 weeks, you were a failure as a teacher. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And what about the children who are homeless, whose, mother is high on drugs, whose father or mother are in prison, who are suicidal themselves? I was talking to a local middle school teacher who had all of those scenarios, to deal with. What about those kids? Really? Percentages in 2 weeks, or the teacher's a failure? Right. That's ridiculous.
Well, listen, if you're interested, read that article, Wrong Answers, in the July, I can't remember which week, but one of the July issues of the New Yorker. It's well worth your time.